Honorable Member for Swizzell Saltibus and Minister for Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Fiscal Incentive Amendment.
Fiscal Incentives Amendment.
Member for Swizzell Saltibus.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 48-2 to allow the bill to go through the remaining stages of this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Fiscal Incentive Amendment. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would wish to acknowledge in the presence of, in our presence today, my permanent secretary, who has worked tirelessly to ensure that we bring in this bill to the House today, alongside a former director, Ms. Nancy Francis, who has now moved on to Victoria Hospital as the executive director, who initially, and I speak to about 2 years ago, was the one spearheading this initiative. And also to acknowledge Mr. Esley Laffey, Commerce and Industry Officer. These are some of the very hard-working people who have been part of the group working on putting this bill together. Mr. Speaker, before I go into the amendments, substantive amendments to this bill, I would just like to give a brief background and the rationale for and the justification for us coming up with what we believe would be a revolutionary bill for the benefit of the service sector in St. Lucia. The Fiscal Incentive Act, Cap 15.16, is the primary legislation governing the award of incentives to manufacturing or processing industries. Fiscal incentives were introduced to facilitate local and foreign investment in the productive sector of the economy. In its current format, Mr. Speaker, the Act offers a range of incentives to manufacturing entities, and it includes the following. 1, tax holidays for a maximum of 15 years, waiver of duties and consumption tax on imported plant, machinery and equipment, and the waiver of import duties and consumption tax on imported raw material and packaging. Any manufacturer in St. Lucia can currently qualify for such fiscal incentives if the enterprise, Mr. Speaker, manufactures an approved product. And by an approved product, what we mean is that it has to be declared by an order of cabinet for a manufacturer to be an approved enterprise. And the level of the incentives that is granted is dependent on 1, the quantum of the entity's export, the local value, content, and the level of capital outlay. Mr. Speaker, we note that the current act was developed sometime in 1974, a long time ago. And at that time, St. Lucia's industrial development policy was focused on import substitution. In that context, the regime spoke to the provision of assistance to entities involved in the manufacturing of goods, as opposed to industries in general. So it did not speak to primary industry, which is, we say, sourcing of raw materials, mining, for example. secondary industry, which is what we currently have in place, which is manufacturing and agro-processing, or the tertiary industry provision of services. It was really just limited to the manufacturing and agro-processing. And as government's focus, Mr. Speaker, has evolved over the years, in line with the changing global business climate, the Fiscal Incentive Cap 15.16 has really diminished in relevance to St. Lucia's strategy and our developmental goals. For example, Mr. Speaker, there is very different correlation between the various incentives regime that we have currently. We have Fiscal Incentive Act, the Tourism Incentive Act, Agricultural Incentive Bill. We also have various strategic policy instruments such as the Medium-Term Strategic Plan, National Export Strategy, Invest in Lucia Act, and the National Services Policy. So, Mr. Speaker, the current Act, it does not allow sufficient flexibility that would enable the private sector to take advantage of emerging opportunities and trends on the global market. We are very aware that there are opportunities that currently exist, for example, through the EPA, the European Partnership Agreement, which caters to our service providers and goods manufacturers. And with what we are trying to do, it will enable these service providers to take advantage of the opportunities that exist for trade. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, the recent extension of Article 164 under the CARICOM Treaty will enable our manufacturers increased opportunity for regional export such that opportunities can be further enhanced. And by that, we will be able to support these companies for further expansion. However, Mr. Speaker, we recognize, and I am all too familiar with it based on the number of visits that I have by various manufacturers, that the inherent time limitation, which is 15 years, it has come to serve as a deterrent for mature manufacturers who are considering expansion-related investments to increase their productivity and their competitiveness. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to think of remedial measures, and we need to speak long-term and short-term. The long-term measures is, Mr. Speaker, that the government of St. Lucia must be proactive in creating and sustaining conditions under which our private sector can continue to grow and compete on the international stage. There is need, Mr. Speaker, for a comprehensive review of all of St. Lucia's regimes in keeping with international best practice and with a broader vision of reducing bureaucracies and other impediments to business. In this regard, the Department of Finance has engaged the World Bank for technical assistance in reviewing tax expenditure, inclusive of revenue foregone under the Fiscal Incentive Program under the Ministry of Agriculture, Commerce and Tourism, respectively. This is seen as a long-term solution to the ongoing debate on incentives and their resulting benefits. However, the research, planning and implementation time required for such an endeavor can be substantial. So we need to provide some short-term measure now so that our people could get some sort of relief to ensure their expansion and their growth. So this is what the ministry in the interim has proposes, which is the amendment to the Fiscal Incentive Act, which we are here to debate today. This, we believe, Mr. Speaker, will meet the immediate needs of our private sector, and they are in keeping with the current policy directions. One, to increase the productive capacity of exporting manufacturing entities, assist new businesses to penetrate international markets, and grow and develop the services sector by attracting business processing outsourcing firms, which we recognize currently, Mr. Speaker. There seems to be a growing interest in St. Lucia because of the talent they have recognized in our people. And only this week, Mr. Speaker, we got another one of these companies who recognizes that talent and have come in, and very interesting and what we really attracted to is that the salaries that they have indicated that they will be paying to employees, Mr. Speaker, is almost 85% above what is currently being paid by similar businesses. So we are very happy, with that opportunity that exists to create employment for our youth and to provide much needed assistance to boost the export of services. So, Mr. Speaker, we would go into the various amendments as it relates to the Fiscal Incentive Act. Amendment of Section 2, Mr. Speaker, speaks to deleting the word industry, and we will substitute the word industry by inserting in the correct alphabetical sequence the following definition. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I was a bit ahead of myself. Just to explain industry. It means a service, manufacturing, or processing industry. And 2, it includes deep-sea fishing and shrimping, if deep-sea fishing and shrimping form part of an integrated processing operation. And it does not include agriculture and tourism, as these already have their separate legislation. So, approved services means a declared service under Section 5, and service, Mr. Speaker, means a service specified as in Schedule A. All changes under this section, Mr. Speaker, are geared towards the inclusion of services as a sector to be considered for fiscal incentives in the development of industry. However, Mr. Speaker, Schedule 1A, and we'll get to that a little later, provides a listing of the specific service categories under 4 broader service subsector headings. And we have heard about it before, but I will again go over it, Mr. Speaker. 1, creative industries, professional services, spa and wellness, and ICT. Fiscal incentives offered to service providers will be limited to this listing. And as I indicated, Mr. Speaker, this is the beginning. As time goes on, we may decide that we may want to expand that list. The amendments to Section 2 are in keeping with the National Service Policy of St. Lucia and the recommended actions therein. Substitution of Section 5, Mr. Speaker, speaks to approved product. The Principal Act is amended by deleting Section 5 and substituting the following. Approved product or service. Cabinet may, by order published in the Gazette, declare a product for manufacture or service for delivery by an approved enterprise to be an approved product or approved service. And the substitution, Mr. Speaker, of approved product to read approved product or service. And under this section, Mr. Speaker, Cabinet extends Cabinet authority to now consider targeted services for declaration along with manufactured products. Substitution of Section 6, Mr. Speaker, order declaring approved enterprises. The Principal Act is amended by deleting Section 6 and substituting the following. Declaration of approved enterprise. 6.1. Cabinet may, on application made by or on behalf of an enterprise, 1A, for the purpose of establishing an industry in St. Lucia, to manufacture an approved product or deliver an approved service, or B, in the case of an enterprise that is manufacturing an approved product or delivering an approved service. If satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that this is in the public interest, declare the enterprise as an approved enterprise. Cabinet, in making an order under Section 5, shall declare the enterprise as an approved enterprise with effect from the date specified in the order. Similarly to 2, Mr. Speaker, and to my last point, the substitution in this section extends Cabinet authority to declare as approved enterprises both manufacturing and service providers. As we will see later, Mr. Speaker, in the amendment, the category of service providers that can be approved is limited to specific services under the 4 targeted subsectors of the National Services Policy as listed in Schedule A. Amendment of Section 12, Mr. Speaker, exemption from income tax. Section 12 of the Principal Act is amended by inserting immediately after subsection 2 the following new subsections 3 and 4. 3 reads, notwithstanding subsection 1, in the case of a group enterprise that receives a tax holiday period under Schedule 3, on the expiration of that tax holiday period, Cabinet may grant complete or partial exemption from income tax as specified under Schedule 5 to an approved enterprise if the approved enterprise makes an investment specified under Schedule 5. And we will just go over what Schedule 5 speaks to a little later, Mr. Speaker. And that tax holiday period granted under subsection 3 must not be for a period exceeding 5 years. So, Mr. Speaker, as we see in the ministry continuously, we have several manufacturers coming to us seeking additional relief because of various expansions or various hardships that they have existed. They look for some relief, but because of legislation, we cannot assist. And we recognize that we can provide some incentives, but taking into consideration some expansion or some improvement in your plant. And we will speak to what exactly would qualify an enterprise to get such an incentive. So, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, so current subsections 1 and 2 speak to the authority of Cabinet to grant complete or partial exemption from income tax for approved enterprise. This, however, is limited to a maximum period of 15 years, dependent on the classification of enterprise as in Schedule 3. The inclusion of subsections 3 and 4 will allow for the extension of income tax past the 15-year period for matured enterprises who meet specific criteria in terms of investment under Schedule 5. This extension greatly benefits matured manufacturers on island who seek to invest additional finances for the purpose of expansion. This in keeping with ongoing trends with the local manufacturing industry, whereby gains for this sector have been largely attributable to existing manufacturers expanding their operations as opposed to new manufacturers establishing operations on the island. Where these matured entities have firmly established presence on the domestic market, further expansion of operations will lead to the creation or expansion of export potential. This is also a strategic effort on the part of the ministry as we seek to take advantage to increase inter-regional trade through the recent extension of Article 164 regime of the CARICOM Treaty, allowing for further protection for LDCs. Article 164 will soon be implemented in St. Lucia. The objective of the regime, Mr. Speaker, is to increase the participation of the LDCs, including St. Lucia, inter-regional trade. This amendment to the Fiscal Incentive Act will lend support to this initiative and enable our matured manufacturers to take advantage of this safeguard mechanism. And you know, Mr. Speaker, these things are not something that will run forever. So, you know, we urge our manufacturers and providers to take advantage of these things now, because every time you negotiate these things, you hear the rumblings from the MDCs as to how much longer will we continue with these things. So it's only a matter of time before these things are tightened. So as it is right now, like they say, le by show, take advantage of it. We'll have a competition. What is this? Insertion of new section 12A. The Principal Act is amended by inserting immediately after section 12 the following new section 12A. Exemptions from customs duty and excise tax. Cabinet may grant an approved enterprise that delivers an approved service under parts A, B, C, and D of Schedule 1A complete or partial exemption from customs duty and excise tax on plant, equipment, machinery, spare parts, raw materials, or components. It is important to note here, Mr. Speaker, that the extension of fiscal incentives at this point to service providers as specified in Schedule 1A is limited to customs duty and excise tax exemptions. We need to make very clear on that. And this is for, as I just said, plant, equipment, machinery, spare parts, raw materials, or components. Due to the dynamic nature of services, due to the dynamic nature of the service trade, Mr. Speaker, this category of fiscal incentive offered to the services sector is expected to have a direct and immediate impact on their levels of productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness. Where global trade in services has expanded at an accelerated rate, one key element of development within the sector remains that of technological advancement. And this creating a need for service providers to constantly invest in new equipment, software, and other technological inputs in order to maintain a competitive edge. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, how quick things become obsolete in the system. You buy a phone today, next year it's, it's what you consider to be, obsolete. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, this is quite apt for our medical and dental services sector, which is one of the subsectors of the professional services within Schedule 1 that has been targeted. So therefore, new technology has, in this regard, has not only led to advancement in the efficiency and quality of healthcare globally, but, Mr. Speaker, and I heard the Honourable Prime Minister speak to it earlier about the quality of our doctors in St. Lucia. We have a very high level of doctors in St. Lucia. What sometimes they are missing, Mr. Speaker, is the equipment, the necessary equipment to perform various procedures. This incentive would now enable various practitioners to be able to bring in equipment that they would have thought initially would have been extremely against their financial means because of duties that they would most probably have to pay at the dock, at the ports. So we can now, be even more ready to sell St. Lucia as a medical tourism destination because we have the expertise here. It's just that sometimes the limitations of the deep pockets, Mr. Speaker. So with regards to the medical and dental services, I think this is just one example of the potential impact that we can have in terms of the incentive that will be provided to that sector. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, other services such as telecommunications, engineering, accountants, I'm sure the leader of the opposition would love to hear that accountants were included in this, are also seen as critical inputs to manufacturing and other categories of the productive sector. There is a logical argument as put forward by the WTO, Mr. Speaker, and I quote it because I really, really love this quote as stated by the WTO, that an inefficient infrastructure is akin to an indirect tax on businesses. Or to put it more bluntly, Mr. Speaker, the more expensive or inefficient the underlying services, the harder it is to trade goods from the WTO. This amendment serves to address the concern as it relates to the general status of commerce in St. Lucia. The next amendment, Mr. Speaker, is insertion of a new section 24A. The Principal Act is amended by inserting immediately after section 24 the following new section 24A. 24A speaks to Cabinet may by order publish in the Gazette amend the schedules to this Act. Endangering a proactive approach to private sector development, this provision allows for the needed flexibility in considering future policy changes in lieu of the evolving needs of the business community. It also takes into consideration the phased approach of the National Service Policy, whereby additional service subsectors are to be incorporated. As I indicated earlier, Mr. Speaker, we are starting somewhere, but as we go along, we may recognize other sectors that may qualify and for benefits. Insertion of new Schedule 1A. As I spoke earlier, Mr. Speaker, I said I would list it. The Principal Act is amended by inserting immediately after Schedule 1 the following new Schedule 1A. So Schedule 1A, Services, Part A, which speaks to the professional services, and we list accounting services, management consulting services, photographic services, architectural services, engineering services, integrated engineering services, printing and publishing services, veterinary services, and medical and dental services. Part B, Mr. Speaker, which speaks to the creative industries, which one of the areas I'm most excited about, Mr. Speaker, because we're recognizing there's a demand for our artists in all over the world, but they need to hone their skills at home, and this can definitely assist. So the areas under creative industries, Mr. Speaker: motion picture projection service, entertainment service, sporting and other recreational services, motion picture projection and videotape production and distribution services. Part C speaks to information and communication technologies, and as I said, Mr. Speaker, we see the fast rate at which equipment becomes obsolete. 1, telecommunications services, online information or data processing, including transaction processing. Part D, I'm sure Minister of Tourism would welcome this, speaks to spa and wellness. 1, beauty and spa, physiotherapists and services provided by midwives and para-medical personnel. And 3, medical laboratories. Schedule 1A highlights the 4 broad service subsectors initially targeted by the National Services Policy. These are further delineated to include specific service categories which are in keeping with W120 service sectorial classification list under the World Trade Organization. Mr. Speaker, I will now expound a little on insertion of the new Schedule 5, which speaks to the Principal Act is amended by inserting immediately after Schedule 4 the following new Schedule 5. Schedule 5 speaks for the manufacturing entities. If you're making a new investment from EC 1 million to up to EC 5 million, you can get exemption of 50% corporate tax. And if your new investment is in excess of EC 5 million, exemption of up to 75% corporate tax. So Schedule 5 highlights the conditions for the extension of income tax holidays to mature manufacturing entities that have exhausted the previous limitations. It is based on the level of investment as an objective criterion to merit consideration. So, Mr. Speaker, I think all of us in this House today would be very pleased with this new amendment that is coming through, because over the years, time and time again, you've continuously heard that there seems to be only one sector getting the bigger piece of the pie, and it's not being shared among what is more locally owned. I think this is a direct intervention to ensure that many of our small businesses would now be able to get that boost, to be able to bring in much needed plant machinery, equipment, spare parts, raw materials, as we heard, to, 1, boost their business, which could then now give them the opportunity to start hiring people, to enhance their product, and hopefully would be able to export on the world stage. So, Mr. Speaker, in concluding, the anticipated intra-regional and international trade, and by extension the increase in economic activity, will give rise, Mr. Speaker, to continuous returns on my government's investment. And that is in the productive and services industries through these additional fiscal incentives. Mr. Speaker, as I said, the long-term measures is something that will take a little while, but we believe the shot in the arm is required now. And while you may hear people speak to loss of revenue, Mr. Speaker, we believe there is a more significant benefit as it relates to industry growth. Any country, Mr. Speaker, that is doing exceptionally well in terms of the growth of their GDP, you recognize small business play a critical role in that. And small businesses definitely need, Mr. Speaker, some sort of intervention, some sort of assistance. And I believe that is a beginning, for us to get to that stage on the international market that we would like to get. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that a fiscal incentives amendment bill be read a second time. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, The last time I stood up in this house and the government was passing some legislation, I think it was on tourism, and I said it was good legislation. I was castigated by the member for Cashew Southeast because there is a thinking, there is a feeling that only one set of people want St. Lucia to prosper. There is a feeling that wisdom only exists in one side of the house, particularly in the brains of two individuals in the government, and these two individuals have control and power over everything. They know everything. They are everything else. And any time you say anything, they castigate you, and they look for all kinds of sinister motives. So the last time I stood here and I said something in tourism, I can't recall the thing. He got up and he said all kinds of things, but all good things come to an end. Mr. Speaker, I understand the situation the Minister of Commerce is faced with in terms of incentives and incentives for services. There's been a cry all over the world to involve services, to treat services the same way as manufacturing. Because I don't think many people know that a large part of St. Lucia's GDP comprises of the services sector. And the services sector did not get the same level of incentives as the manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, so I understand the conjure of the minister, but we tried this services business, incentives for services. He is the parliamentary representative for Labrie. Third time, three-star general, he'll win the fourth time and the fifth time. That's what it is.
Honorable member, don't get distracted.
No, I'll just answer his question. Because you see, he could not answer my question this morning. He still hasn't answered it, but I can answer his. And any question any of them ask me, I can answer.
Proceed, sir, proceed.
I asked them, what happened to Mr. George James? They haven't answered.
Mr. Proceed, sir.
Alva is the parliamentary.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, remain focused and proceed.
No, I can't find anybody. So, Mr. Speaker, the teachers asking for you. The teachers, they asking for you, and the teachers in Anchipo. You understand? You see exactly. You see what I mean?
Honorable Leader of the Opposition,
Can't help yourself. Can't help yourself.
remain focused.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm very focused. They try to put me out of focus. You see, they've tried that all the time. I'm okay. So, Mr. Speaker, no, you see, the Minister of Commerce says he's not a politician, so he got involved in that. I applaud him. So, Mr. Speaker, so we have now to bring the services sector in line with the manufacturing sector in terms of fiscal incentives. When we were in government, that problem came all the time. Sometimes people came with services, hairdressers, spa operators, and they wanted incentives. So what we did, we give them incentives under the Customs Act, I think, where you waived customs, import taxes, consumption taxes, and import taxes, something of that nature, because we could not take them under the fiscal incentives regime. There was a lot of discussion. On how you would merge and how you create incentives for the service industry. I think there's a body here called the Coalition of Services. They have been advocating that all the time. In fact, that was encouraged when I was the Minister for Commerce. So this discussion, and he also had to deal with the EPA and CARICOM and all sorts of things that made it rather difficult to integrate the services sector into the whole fiscal incentives regime. So this legislation was long in coming. But there are a few questions that I would like to ask the Minister. what will happen to existing service industries? What will happen to the existing firms who are already operating? Do they have to apply for the incentives, or do the incentives come automatically? Because there are a number of existing services, accounting firms, and he called me. I don't have any accounting firm again, so I'm not involved in that. I'm out of practice. Yes, I retired. I'm a full-time politician. Full-time politician. So, what will happen to existing accounting firms? What will happen to the major firms in the country? Will they get incentives? Will they apply for incentives? Will they not be liable to income tax? That's a question I'd like to ask him. There is also this situation regarding mature industries. And the way we solve that is that we said that all the incentives that existing mature companies had, these incentives will continue as if they never ended. That was the way we tried to solve the problem with mature industries. So that piece of legislation would clear it and make it much simpler. Then there is the matter of subsection 5 in the legislation. And subsection 5 removes completely, it deletes section 6 of the Fiscal Incentives Act. Fiscal Incentives Act, an order declaring the approved enterprise, subsection 6, I noticed that you have completely eliminated subsection 6 of the Act, and you give Cabinet the responsibility to declare any company or any service industry an approved enterprise. Under section 6 in the old Act, it said that there were certain criteria where Cabinet would order declaring a company an approved enterprise. It gives several sections where it said, in determining whether an order should be made under subsection 5, Cabinet should take into account the number of enterprises already manufacturing or about to manufacture an approved product, the output or anticipated output of the enterprise. I noticed you have eliminated that completely in the new Act, and you've given Cabinet the sole power and the sole authority to do that. That is something that you could possibly explain why. There may be a different reason why you are doing that. But the reasons why, as detailed in the old law, I see no reason why they could not be in the new law, because you've transferred the power solely to Cabinet. Cabinet has the power to declare it under conditions that, and you know, we run a government of Cabinet, because most members of Parliament are members of Cabinet. So the information that Cabinet has, Parliament does not have. So I would like to find out why was that eliminated, and would there be any conditions under which an industry would be called an approved enterprise. There obviously would be some loss of revenue, but that loss of revenue would be more significant if existing companies are taken in that legislation. So it's very important that we clarify whether the Act speaks to existing service industries or it speaks to new service industries. I think that would clear many things. In terms of the Act, Mr. Speaker, I would think that whilst we were doing the amendments, we could have a policy towards vehicles, because giving incentives of vehicles has always been a vexing issue. At some point, they say you only give incentives to specialized vehicles. The issue of vehicle incentives has been a vexing issue for a long time. Everybody wants an incentive for a vehicle to do their private business, and they say they use it for the company. I think we should try, I know it's very difficult, if we could have a policy regarding incentives for vehicles. And whilst you were amending the Act, possibly you could have possibly you could have thought of making that adjustment or that amendment. Speaking about creative industries, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that we've brought creative industries officially into the loop. But again, to assist creative industries, we used to do it through the Customs Act. But also, I just want to remind honorable members that this government donated equipment, engineering equipment, sound engineering equipment, to many people to help them, and that was the beginning of the influx of recordings in this country. It was the government through the then NDC that made equipment available to people, so that's where all the recording of music came into being. So I'm glad that you are continuing. So this is not this is new. It's something that I think is a good way to go, but that was started already. So those who tried to create the impression that the Labour Party government did nothing and we were a complete waste of time, these are the things that we did. So I think possible for us to remind that this is an extension of that work, and I think it was long in coming. Once we can assure ourselves that there is equity, once we can assure themselves that people are not afraid. I'll tell you something, Mr. Speaker. People have come to me when I used to practice and asked me for incentives, to apply for incentives. And I will confess to you, Mr. Speaker, I will never send an incentive in my name to this cabinet. Never. Because I am almost sure, if it ever came under the name of Philip J. Pierre, it will be put in the garbage can just because it came under my name. So I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that there should be, I'm saying again, I would never send any incentive or any request for incentive to this cabinet under my name when I was practicing. Never. Because if I did that, I know the treatment it would have got once it reached the cabinet. That is the level of faith I have in the cabinet making decisions. And I say that very, very seriously. I make no bones about it. I really mean that, and I believe that anything that will come in the cabinet under my name or anybody associated with me would be discarded and put in the rubbish dump. That's how I feel. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that we're trying to bring some level of transparency to these incentives, and I hope that they are these incentives. There is equity. There is no sense of political retribution, and all service providers, regardless of their political persuasion, are given equal treatment under the law. With that, I want to tell the Minister that that amendment is necessary, and it took a long time to come, but it's necessary. And apart from the issues that I've raised, I see no problem with it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Castries Southeast.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Castries East chose to start his presentation by making reference to his support of a bill and that he was castigated for supporting the bill. I didn't quite understand where he was going. But, Mr. Speaker, I stand here to applaud the Minister of Commerce and Parliamentary Rep for Choiseul Saltibus for introducing this piece of legislation to the Parliament, the amendments to the Fiscal Incentive Act, especially in the areas that it highlights. I heard the member for Castries, he said that it was a long time in coming. The laws have been there from 1974, and he's often boasted about how long he's been in this parliament. I wonder why he didn't champion a piece of legislation like that for the amendments and the changes that was required. For that matter, if in my recollection, Mr. Speaker, through you, he was the Minister of Commerce at one time. He was the Minister of Tourism at one time. So, by his own definition. But Mr. Speaker, we must not take away from the discussion here the value of this piece of amendment to what is happening in St. Lucia today in terms of our local businesses. There's always an outcry, Mr. Speaker, about foreign entities and how much incentives they get and what is in place for our local people, our local business people, our local manufacturers. And given that the business has changed so much in the world today, the businesses that we once attracted in the apparel factories and the assembly plants and all of these no longer exist in our hemisphere. We do not have the means to compete in these areas. But Mr. Speaker, we are seeing a new trend with call centers, with services that we have a competitive advantage in. You know, Mr. Speaker, when we see what is being offered under this government is not paying lip service to what needs to happen, but real action is being taken. And at the last sitting of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, you would recall that there was an amendment to the Vat Act. All of that is in keeping with where we are moving to reposition the economy of St. Lucia. How we are going to function as maximizing the output of every sector within the economy. And one of the outcries of the manufacturing sector was the cost up front of doing business. So the amendment to the Vat Act would bring some relief. And further, this new incentive adjustment or amendment is now creating a much better platform for service industries that previously had to be dependent upon whether somebody would champion their cause in cabinet. And I note what the member for Castries is said about, you know, these applications were done based on the Customs Act and what was happening, but it was who would champion it for you. Presently, there is an established procedure under the Incentive Act, let's say for tourism, that you can apply and you can know what to apply for. And it is not entirely to the discretion of a cabinet, but it is something that is outlined. And if you believe that you've not been treated fairly, you have some recourse in saying, well, look here, why did this person get these incentives and I cannot get it? So what we are seeing there is a system being established. And you know the next stages that we need to see this going to, Mr. Speaker, is the stage where it don't even necessarily have to come to the cabinet to make a decision. But that once there are clear established guidelines and procedures, that persons can apply to the relevant ministry, and the ministry should be able to have the authority to be able to grant this, so that it's never tied down to a politician. You know, Mr. Speaker, I was a bit taken aback that the member for Castries East would go as far as saying he will never send something under his name. I don't know how to interpret that. He never said he will never ask for concessions, Mr. Speaker, or any incentives. He said he will not do it under his name. So maybe he should clarify for us whether he would do it under another name. You know, Mr. Speaker, because when we make statements in the Honorable House, we need to be clear about what we are saying. And I don't know, Mr. Speaker, that any member, by virtue of being a part of a cabinet or being a parliamentarian or a former parliamentarian, should ever be denied the rights that are entitled to them as a citizen or as a business person in this country. And Mr. Speaker, maybe we judge other people based on how we behave ourselves. But I recall, Mr. Speaker, in a discussion one time in the cabinet, we were discussing incentives, and I said, look, if the then leader of the opposition, Dr. Anthony, would apply for something, once it is for the benefit of St. Lucia, once it is to create employment or anything, I would support it with both hands. And Mr. Speaker, I can be consistent about that because people should not be denied. But when I heard the leader of the opposition say he will never do this because he knows what is going to be the outcome, is that how you treat us if you are in government and you expect us to treat you the same way? Try us. Send something to the cabinet for incentives and see if you wouldn't get the approval once it meets the requirements. That's the easiest way to do it. Don't come and suppose things in this house when all you could have done was send a request that you have, see that it is turned down, and then come back to the house and say, well, I was turned down and I believe it's because I'm a parliamentarian. Not to make those blanket statements. So, Mr. Speaker, when I look at the areas, medical and dental services, Mr. Speaker, there is a need for greater expansion in this sector, where more persons would be offering more services. Greater competition should be able to drive the price down in favor of the citizenry. And so when we grant this, so if we can get more medical labs open, if we can get more services in this sector of medicine, you know what's going to happen, Mr. Speaker? The price is going to go down because competition usually drives the price down. So when I see what is offered there, it means that the doctors and the nurses and specialized people can now make an investment into something that maybe otherwise they would not have done. I look at the creative industries, and we remember there used to be somebody appointed in the creative industries in the previous Labour administration. What was being done? What were the incentives that was put in place then so that the creative industry could have benefited? We have seen the impact of the local music in St. Lucia. We have seen the creativity in the arts and some of the things. And what a good champion for this project, the member for Choiseul Saltibus, which is one of the areas where St. Lucia is best known for creativity in terms of handicraft and some of the pottery and a lot of the straw hats and all of the other things that are being done. Now this incentive opens the avenue so that this can become an industry by itself, where the persons can go in and make the requisite investment. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, it's easy for us to talk about things, but to really make it happen and create the platform for it to really materialize, that is what I see being piloted by the Minister of Commerce and member for Choiseul Saltibus. Because I think that he brings a level of experience to this thing, understanding it from a financial perspective, being a banker, and today being a parliamentary representative. He would know all the challenges the people met when they had to get a loan in this sector. And so I am sure that his input in this is bringing great value to where commerce is going under this government and under his watch. Mr. Speaker, telecommunications services, we have seen what is happening. We have seen the developments that are taking place. Some of the companies are looking for people in the telecom sector, and especially in the call centers, to be able to meet the demands of that market. Mr. Speaker, this government came under heavy criticism for Ojo Labs and for what it brought to the table in terms of artificial intelligence. And then the member, he's not there, the member for Castries spoke about it's mind-bending and it's to try and turn people's mind politically. I mean, what kind of reasoning is that? That a leader of the opposition would have that mindset towards technology and towards the trend that the world is going into. But you see, Mr. Speaker, when members of this Honorable House make these kinds of statements and you take them to task, then they tell you you're castigating them. How can a member of this Honorable House say that in the area of artificial intelligence and what was happening at Ojo Labs was to bend people's minds in a particular political direction? But here today, Mr. Speaker, how many young St. Lucians in the south of the island have found gainful, sustainable employment through these initiatives? And I know that more local people can now get involved in the business because these incentives are expanded further. Take Digicel and Line Flow. What is happening there? A lot of the services are now outsourced to our local people who have some knowledge and exposure in the industry. Now through these incentives, they will be able to get the requisite equipment, vehicles, and whatever is required so that the services can be provided by local business people. You see, Mr. Speaker, just this little piece of legislation has so much value for where this economy is going and what the government is attempting to do. Spa services. I mean, so many of they have people, they have the professional skills to be a good person to give you a massage, a masseuse. But you know how much it costs to buy the table? Some of them want to buy the table and some of the basic ingredients, and they are telling me these things are too costly. Through this, they would be able to get the incentives so that they can grow their business. Because, Mr. Speaker, that is the whole idea. Small businesses across the world create the greatest level of employment. Don't worry about big business. By the time you calculate the jobs created in small businesses and small industries, they become the biggest employers in any economy. And the neglect or the oversight on the part of various administrations in the past to address these key concerns are being tabled here today. And we are making the adjustments so that it gives these people the best opportunity to succeed. The final one I want to touch on, Mr. Speaker, is the medical services, paramedical services. I am hoping that through this legislation, that you can now have private ambulances. You can have people thinking of, okay, I am going to invest in an ambulance. I am going to have the key people that I require so that what is going to happen under this incentive, because you go right there to Matnik. You have the air ambulance. Every time we have an emergency in St. Lucia, we have to call to Matnik to send an air ambulance to St. Lucia. These are the incentives that would encourage our people to invest in the local communities, in the towns and villages in this country. Are there people who have the skills, who have been trained as paramedics to be able to be the first responders, who can now offer their services, form a small company, buy an ambulance, and have the services readily available in the community? Because we know the constraints to government. Sometimes you call, by the time the ambulance comes from Castries to get to the location. These are the opportunities that this simple amendment to the legislation offers. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I would not let this opportunity pass and not applaud the Minister of Commerce and his team for bringing in this legislation at this point in time, given where we are in growing this economy and the overall picture of building a new St. Lucia, a St. Lucia where every small business person can feel that they have a part to play in the growth and development of the economy. So I give my 100% support to this piece of legislation and to the Minister and the team from Commerce for bringing it to this Honorable House. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Mekudno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to lend my support to the Honourable Member for Choiseul Saltibus, to congratulate him and his team for championing this very important piece of legislation. With your kind permission, Mr. Speaker, and I do not wish at all to sound discriminatory, but to say that I'm especially glad for this legislation because only a couple days ago I encountered a young lady, a very young lady, an entrepreneur who was waiting her turn at a bank, seeking the kind of direction and financial support to build her fledgling business. I used her as an example, but there are countless others who I've encountered, especially in the health and wellness subsector, the cosmetology subsector, who really want to stand on their own 2 feet. And even as we participate in international and regional fora, and we speak of the economic empowerment of women, I think I want to congratulate my colleague and say this is a real, tangible avenue through which we can afford the young women in particular, especially within the cosmetology subsector, the kind of economic independence they so desire. I know too we have females in other subsectors, especially in terms of graphic designing, marketing, etc., all of which stand to benefit from this piece of legislation. So as Minister for Gender Relations, I continue to work along with other agencies, both here and abroad, to ensure that we can live true to the promise that we made to young people, and in this particular instance, to young women in particular, to afford them the opportunities to gain their economic independence, which always redounds to the benefit of their families and their society. So again, let me congratulate the Honourable Member and his team for championing this absolutely important piece of legislation. In a previous life too, I worked very closely with the Coalition of Services, and that is something that they had lobbied for a long time ago, as the IT sector, for example, was itself evolving. Yet again, another subsector that stands to benefit. So let me thank you for this. There are many others who will benefit, but these two I want to highlight because of the level of intimate relationship I've had with them, and I understand in very real terms how much this legislation can mean to them. Thank you.
Member for Mekwood South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also want to join my voice in supporting the incredible work that the Minister and in particular the members from his ministry that have put in bringing this important piece of legislation to Parliament. One of the fastest growing sectors in the world today is the orange economy. And St. Lucia has, and our young people have shown a great aptitude in this particular area. We just have to look at a Denry segment. We have to look at the young man that was working at Ojo, that was able to rewrite the program there in order to improve the levels of efficiencies. And you know what was incredible about him is that he recognized the problem, wrote the new program, and delivered it to them without ever involving the senior management. And I remember the owners saying to me that their PhDs in Austin would have picked that up at some point, but it was incredible that this young guy, who was a graduate of Sir Arthur Lewis College, was able to achieve that. And it continues to tell me the level of talent that we have here. I'm also extremely encouraged, and I want to thank the Minister of Education and certainly the Minister of Youth, in particular of what we're going to be doing with Radio St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the attempt here is to convert Radio St. Lucia into a recording studio as well as to a broadcasting station, and that will be able to do videos, sound engineering, as well as teaching broadcasting. So it's being made part of the Sir Arthur Lewis College. And I know we have a new principal. I don't know if he's official yet. He's Dr. Keith Nurse. And Dr. Keith Nurse, I think he's Trinidadian, am I right? Is one of the world leading authorities on the orange economy. And so the introduction of this piece of legislation, timed with the appointment of Dr. Nurse, as well as with the work that we're going to be undertaking at the old Radio St. Lucia, is incredible. And I know that the Minister of Youth is also attempting to put a recording studio, if I'm not mistaken, Minister, is it in the Valley? In Lacaille, which is the location where the old police station would be, the building that was renovated. We're actually looking to make that into a recording studio as well, given the talent that's coming out of there. We've certainly also seen the change with the events company of St. Lucia in making that separation from the Tourism Authority and recognizing that entertainment is an industry in itself. And while tourism benefits significantly from the exposure, but what we wanted to do was to make sure that there were appropriate resources being put into that area. And I'm happy to see that some of our own suppliers are getting work outside of St. Lucia. But more importantly, we're seeing the expansion of events, both put on by the government as well as obviously being put on by the private sector. So I'm saying this to say to you that the incentives are important, but that my government is continuing to support the development of young people. In our manifesto, we had indicated that we were going to put $10 million into the St. Lucia Development Bank. In fact, we have put in $20 million into the St. Lucia Development Bank. And we're hoping now with the establishment of the Economic Fund through the CIP program, that the Economic Fund will also now lend money to the St. Lucia Development Bank to be able to expand the amount of money that is being lent to small service enterprises and particularly to the young people. And that we're also hoping that the Development Bank is going to get into the practice of not only lending money, but also being able to provide equity into these small businesses. So I just want to congratulate the Minister and the Ministry for making this happen. This is certainly going to augment not only the orange economy that we're doing, but I know the Minister of Tourism is also heavily invested in village tourism and the establishment of small enterprises, because as we've indicated, that a successful tourism product is based on authenticity, and it's to celebrate our culture. The $13 million we're spending right now on the Castries market, I think that phase 1 should be opening any day now. I know the Minister of Local Government is very excited about that. And changing the mindset that the designers, the people who are creating all of these arts and crafts are not confused as being vendors. And sometimes we do that. We think of the vendor as being the artisan, when in fact they are actually, two different people. And I'm really hoping that this initiative here will encourage many of those artisans. One that's probably more successful to us in our minds right now is Jalom Yudovic, in terms of the work that he did with the monument that he's done here and the success he's having on a global basis. But since he's been getting this notoriety, that there are people who are now requesting him to do more work. And he was lamenting the fact that he could not bring in his products duty-free. And so therefore, the cost of actually producing some of those things and selling them here in St. Lucia was being made prohibitive, Mr. Speaker, by the fact that there was no venue, no portal for him as an artisan to be able to apply as it would be any other business. And so I had told him that this was coming, so I'm very glad that it's coming at the right time, and I'm hoping that many of the artisans, both in the arts as well as in the music and also in the IT sector, are going to take advantage of this, and that there are a comprehensive group of services that our government is making available, Mr. Speaker, in order to be able to support the development of many more of the small businesses in this country. And you know, when we reduced the VAT rate, Mr. Speaker, it was because of the small businesses. You know, a lot of these small businesses who are renting places, and their rent went up by 15%. And we saw the immediate negative impact of the outfall of that business. Unemployment rate went up, the economy started to contract, and there was sluggish growth. The moment that we were able to lower that VAT rate to 12.5%, Mr. Speaker, immediately we saw the buoyancy coming back in the market. And the growth that we've had to date has not been on the back of big projects. In fact, the big projects are now commencing. But for the first 3 years, it has been policy and fiscal changes, an attitudinal change to support business people, particularly small business people, that I believe has really caused a growth in our economy. And I want to applaud the young St. Lucians for doing what they're doing and making us so very proud. I know that we're going to be coming with a new ambassadorial program in which we're going to be having special incentives for those people who are out there promoting as brand managers, brand diplomats, brand ambassadors for St. Lucia. So again, we're going to look for every single avenue to be able to now support the young people of this country, to really empower them, and that they have to spend their time fighting for competition and not having to fight for success and opportunity in their own country. So again, Minister, I want to applaud this initiative, and I really hope that your staff recognize that the new applications are going to be coming in, and hopefully the quality of service is there to be able to facilitate these young people, because it's not just simply about the application, but it's Export St. Lucia and these kinds of agencies that we have that really handhold these businesses and make sure that they're out there employing people in St. Lucia and promoting the great brand that we have in this country. So again, thank you.
Member for Swazelle Saltibus.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm not sure if your last statement, the long list that we anticipating and we already have, I may just put something in there for additional stuff. So I hope you recognize that. Mr. Speaker, as a government, one of the things we do, and in particular, myself as a minister, is to encourage young people to go into their own businesses. We recognize the creativity, we recognize the talent that a lot of our young people have. And if a lot of our young people, they tell you they don't want to work for anybody. They want to be the masters of their own fate, So I think this is an opportunity for them now to be able to, think that, listen, something has now been created that I can take the opportunity to go further. I would like to encourage the financial institutions to also see this incentive that we were given the various sectors, particularly the startups, as some sort of equity contribution into some sort of stake in the game, and consider that when they, viewing various proposals. Just to respond to the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, he spoke to the process, and the process is very straightforward. An applicant will come with a business proposal, and they will indicate what it is they're applying for, Mr. Speaker. Based on the assessment by the technical people in the ministry, we will decide how we go forward and what level of incentives that will be provided. So I just want to indicate to the member that it's not automatic. Normal procedures will follow, and that is you come to the source, to the ministry, and make your application with a business proposal. Obviously, your taxes should be in order, NIC should be in order to be able to qualify for the various incentives. The member also was concerned as to the loss of revenue, and he spoke particularly to the income tax. But I was very, very specific to indicate, Mr. Speaker, that existing service providers and other people who are seeking these concessions, Mr. Speaker, the concessions are at the port. Customs, duties, excise tax. This does not touch the corporate tax at all. Corporate tax is, as we indicated here, speaks to the mature manufacturing entities. After 15 years, based on the quality or the quantity of investment they're putting in, they would qualify for an additional 5 years, and the quantum of the discount in corporate income tax would suffice. So it is not a matter of existing entities now no longer contributing to the inland revenue, as is the case. So that would most probably something that would be addressed in the long-term solution, and as we indicated, that's work in progress. The member spoke also to the process as it relates to whether approvals are automatic. At the end of the day, Cabinet makes the ultimate decision. But I felt the member, made a very unfair statement, and I know my colleague spoke to it, because as a Cabinet, one of the things I have noticed, in fact, Mr. Speaker, I have heard the Prime Minister time and time again speak to the Minister of Agriculture to indicate to the Minister of Agriculture, why do applications for FAR come to Cabinet? The Prime Minister time and time again has indicated, this is something that can be done by your ministry. That should not be coming to Cabinet. Your people have the expertise. So, if we were a Cabinet that wanted to scrutinize every application, something like that, we would not. The Prime Minister has asked the Minister of Agriculture to get your people to start to work so that they can make these decisions. Okay, as a Cabinet, we don't have to see approval for every FAR coming in. So, I think it was an unfair statement. In fact, Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite would have sent me an application, it would be in my best interest to deal with it right away. Mr. Speaker, I don't know. I can speak for my speaker as it relates to that, because only this week I was telling somebody that as a member of Parliament, representative of the community of Choiseul Saltibus, I remember a lady coming to me crying with a situation with her daughter. Okay, and when I recognized, by doing my own investigation, I realized the story was in terms of she being put out of her father's home. Nowhere for her. The child is in Form 5. Okay, and and the struggles that they were and as a parliamentary rep, I have assisted in several areas. And over the weekend, somebody said, "Vous savez, Madame l'a dit, il can just manger l'argent et qu'il pas vote bao." You think I would take that personally? I'm doing it for the child, Mr. Speaker. So this kind of thing, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to things that come to me, I look at the merit. I don't look, Mr. Speaker, at who's coming to me. I don't look at it. So I just want to make that very clear. In our Cabinet, I have seen many applications from people I have heard giving this government good licks, and we have passed it. So I think that was a very unfair statement, and such. I think the member also spoke with regards to the whole issue of vehicles. Vehicle has to be an integral part of your business for you to qualify. And I will just quickly speak to, for example, the telecommunications sector. A vehicle is an integral part of the business that this sector conducts. And, making an application for vehicles to maybe go around the island, and this is something that we considered, okay? But, we have to take it on a case-by-case basis as it comes to us. There's something, there's a saying, what you don't have, you don't have. So that is why, in terms of the loss of revenue, the member of which and I can have a very lengthy debate on that particular statement that he made. I think the member noted the deletion of section 6, and I acknowledge his concern, but I should just maybe comfort the member by indicating to him that when we look at products which currently exist and services, two completely different industries. And at the end of the day, when an application comes to the ministry, it is not handled by me. It is handled by the technocrats. They are fully aware of what has to be looked into or what has to be scrutinized before the application comes to me for final signing for onward submission to the cabinet. So that, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe is something that I would bust my head over as it relates to that. Mr. Speaker, with regards to what I believe this piece of legislation will do, I believe we are already actually, from a ministry perspective, already anticipating the influx of applicants. My PS and I was speaking very recently, and she was telling me about the long line of applications that are just waiting. Okay, so I believe, Mr. Speaker, this is something that the entire population would welcome, because you would benefit directly or indirectly from the end product. So I want to thank the staff from my ministry and the other stakeholders who were integral in putting this together. Mr. Speaker, as I said, it is not an end to it all. There will be, as time goes on, where we may consider various entities to qualify. But I want to thank my cabinet colleagues for this support and the members opposite as well. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that a fiscal incentives amendment bill be read a second time. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, Cap 15.16.
Honourable members, Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 4.
Substitution of Section 5.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 5.
Substitution of Section 6.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 6.
Amendment of Section 12.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 7.
Insertion of new Section 12A.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill. Clause 8.
Insertion of new Section 24A.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill. Clause 9.
Insertion of new Schedule 1A.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill. Clause 10.
Insertion of new Schedule 5.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as have a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Investment, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister. Member for Mekod North.
Mr. Speaker, with your very kind permission, I cannot help but notice, and it would be remiss of me not to applaud you and your team for moving away from single-use plastics and introducing the reusable water canters. So I want to thank you for that. It may appear to be a simple gesture, but in the spirit of this administration, it is yet another example of living true to our word and matching action with rhetoric. Thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg that the House be suspended sine die.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand adjourned sine die. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting is adjourned.
Thank you for staying with the broadcast. We've come to the end of the afternoon session of the sitting of Parliament. There we saw the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill being laid by the Honourable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs. He described the bill as a revolutionary bill. This bill governs the awarding of incentives to manufacturing entities, including tax holidays, waiver on duties on several items, including equipment. Any of the manufacturing firms have access to such incentives given that they meet their requirements. However, in its current form, the minister indicated that it does not allow sufficient latitude to take advantage of the current opportunities which exist. The time limit on the incentives of 15 years, he says, is not beneficial to mature manufacturers, thus the amendment of the bill. He also called for a comprehensive review of the various incentives acts, and the current amendment made to the bill would cover a number of areas such as creative industries, professional services, and spa and wellness. The bill seeks to increase the entity's ability to export, assist with new businesses, and create opportunities for employment. Leader of the opposition, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, sought to clarify whether existing entities qualified for incentives as well, and a number of other parliamentarians through their support behind the bill, including Honorable Member for Castries South East, Guy Joseph, the Prime Minister, the Honorable Alan Chasney, and Minister for Education, Honorable Gail Rigobert. Honorable Guy Joseph indicated that the provision of the incentives should reach a point where, provided that guidelines are put in place, where the respective ministries would be able to grant approval and the applications would not have to be sent to the cabinet. And the Prime Minister indicated that incentives are important as the government seeks to support the development of young people, especially with the orange economy, hence creative industries being put into the bill as well. So thank you so much for staying with the broadcast. Until next time.